It's My Little Underground. I'm Peter A. This week on the show we have Jarrett Dougherty of Screamales. We talked about their new album Desire Pathway, and Screamales has been a very important band in my life for the past 8 years or so, and they put me on to this great legendary ska band called the Selector, and they've also been a part of some of the best shows that I've been to, including a show that the Screamales played in a movie theater in Times Square a couple of years back, a phenomenal show that we talked about at Music Hall of Williamsburg back in 2015. And Jarrett also talks about upcoming shows the Screamales have in Alaska, and also their experiences playing in Honolulu and Hawaii, and lots of great punk tales from Jarrett Dougherty of Screaming Females, and he's right here on My Little Underground. Jarrett, welcome to My Little Underground, 1/3 of the Screaming Females. So happy to have a Screamale on this show. Glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, but I want to thank you guys for putting me on to the Selector. When you guys covered On My Radio, I love the song so much. I went to my local record store and I bought Too Much Pressure, and it's unbelievable. Such a good album.
Oh yeah. Have you checked out Dance Craze yet? The film?
No.
Oh man, you got to check it out. So it's someone did a documentary of a lot of those two-tone bands around that time.
Oh, I'm writing this down.
And
oh my God,
it's like the actual documentary itself is like, I don't know, it's not like the best thing ever. They kind of frame it as like the history of the UK, like youth culture and stuff, but it's not like fully formed idea. But the live footage in that is unbelievable. And Pauline from the Selector, just like, it's amazing because I mean, I was through a lot of those bands. They look so good while they're just fully going for it, you know? And it's unbelievable because as someone go out there and play for 45 minutes, an hour or whatever, you start drenched in sweat, whatever. Pauline just looks, she's just fully jumping around stage, going wild, and looks like she could just be ready for a photo shoot.
Yeah, like I'm looking at the back of the cover of Too Much Pressure. They're all in suits. They're all they're going to the prom or something like that, or a job interview, and there's so much energy there. And the drumming on that album is sick. It's unbelievable. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think that's something that with a lot of that two-tone stuff, I think something that gets sort of forgotten is that it is really connected to punk, and some of those people had been playing in punk bands or would go on to play in punk bands. But there was also a lot of like R&B bands in the UK, and that was like a really popular thing. So some of those people were not coming from the like, oh, I just picked up my first guitar kind of like, you know, moment I learned 3 chords. They're like, oh no, I've been playing in R&B bands for the last 5 years, like having to like, you know, play 3-hour sets at, you know, down at the club on Friday or Saturday and play all the hits, you know. So I feel like there's a cool fusion there, but it's important to remember, it's like I feel like by the time you get to the 90s or something, a lot of ska bands strictly came from punk. But some of those people, it's like they weren't coming from punk, they were coming from R&B, they were coming from Caribbean music, they're coming from different backgrounds, you know.
What you get is like a punk product. You know what I mean? Because all like any kind of music that we listen to is rooted in somewhere. But then like with the Selector, it's such like it's so raw and unhinged, but there's good song structure there. Like you can say that about any punk band. Like Minor Threat, they always, like Ian MacKaye, every interview I hear him talk about, he's saying melody. That's what he's using. That's like the common refrain.
Yeah.
You know? So this is your idea to cover this band, and then Marissa brought up, let's do On the Radio, right?
Yeah.
This was for a release for a comic book?
Yeah, a comic book got in touch with us, and the artist, he's done a lot of like pretty big work, but it turned out he had been somebody who was like around New Brunswick, New Jersey, which is where our band started. So we had like communicated with him before. It wasn't like it was a close friend or something, but it was like, oh yeah, like Marissa drew this thing for a record I was involved in one time and like that kind of stuff. So he got in touch with us and was like, yeah, I'm putting out this new book and we're going to do a 7-inch series that goes along with it. And the book takes place in the 80s and has this punk rock background. So he's trying to get all these bands to cover 80s kind of like punk and punk adjacent tracks. And that was the one that just popped off for us, like just immediately. That was the one we thought of.
Are you guys big comic readers?
I would say I come and go with it. When I was young, I was really into superhero comics, especially Superman. Like in the wake of the death of Superman, there was like the four Supermen who were trying to battle it out, and there was like the kind of like everyman Superman, and then there was the bad one who was like he had the powers of Superman, but he was willing to like kill people and stuff, which obviously Superman generally didn't do. So I was really into that and followed it for many years. And then I know Marissa's very into underground comics and graphic novels and things, which I've read some really good ones of those. I about halfway through reading Sandman, which I never read when it was actually out. Kind of missed that, but I I have been going back. I'm through two of the four books of the four like anthologies right now on that one.
Have you ever read March, the John Lewis graphic novel?
I have not.
Oh man, it's great. I've only read the first one, but it is unbelievable. It is visually and well, conceptually, it's really good. And you learn a lot about John Lewis and that time period of the civil rights movement. But
Yeah.
it's really cool. I'm not a huge like crazy comic person, but a good graphic novel is a good graphic novel.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it can
Yeah.
kind of bring some stuff. I think that's an interesting example because, obviously most people think of like superheroes or whatever, but there is like somebody like John Lewis, there is this physical element to some of the things he was involved in that I feel like you could capture in a comic book in a really interesting way.
Yeah, and he was a punk rocker too. Literally, that's it's crazy. But you guys did the new album Desire Pathway in Minnesota at Pachyderm Studios. And what's interesting is like you guys kind of have a history with Minnesota too. You guys did a Radio K session years ago, which I absolutely love. That's how I found out about Radio K was your live performance, which is cool. Like the Screaming Females has put me on to so many different things in different directions. So I know this studio is famous for doing In Utero years ago with Steve Albini and all that. So does that have any significance to you at all? Like when you guys record somewhere or go play a show or play with certain band or whatever, do you think of the historical significance to it at all? Does that mean anything?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially as we've lost so many venues over the years that we've played as a band, like historic places that have so many things have gone down. Um, you appreciate it, especially when they suddenly no longer exist. I think for Pachyderm, with a situation like that, it's like there's two sides to it, and the most important side is it's just technically like a world class studio, and that's why all these famous records have gone down there, is because you can make a record like that at this studio. you know so that's the most important part. So it's not like necessarily we're going to be in the studio trying to like find Kurt Cobain's ghost and like summon him for the session or something, but we know some people. We know Steve Albini pretty well at this point, so we're texting him and stuff while we're there, and that the studio has this built-in sauna, and he was talking about like when Nirvana was in the sauna and had some funny story about them in the sauna, and so stuff like that does come up, and you can't ignore it. And we found the picture. There's like a famous picture of Nirvana and Albini sitting in front of the fireplace, and it looks exactly the same in the studio. So so yeah, like that stuff, we don't ignore it for sure. We're aware of it, but ultimately the reason we go there is to get like a job done, which is to make a record that we hope can really deliver.
Yeah. Have you seen Sound City, that documentary?
Yeah, it's been a while, but yeah, I saw it.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I'm listening to when I'm watching the documentary, I'm listening to everybody talk about what the space is like, and I'm thinking, man, Screaming Females will make a hell of an album in here because they definitely fit the raw aesthetic of that space, and they'll
Yeah.
they'll make magic in there. So I want to go back to your first album, Baby Teeth, and when I have it, I have a copy of it. I found it at a flea market on Long Island years ago, and just to see like how far you guys have come, like sonically and I'm thinking, okay, so you recorded that in your attic, and now you're and then like 20 years later, almost 20 years later, you're in this studio. Like, so how do you compare the two experiences, doing recording in a professional studio and doing it in your attic, which can also be professional too?
Yeah. So The first thing that comes to mind, not actually the studio or my bedroom, as it were, for the first one, but is a big difference between those is that that was our first album. We recorded it as we were really learning who we were as a band. So there's songs on there that were from old projects that Mike and Marissa had that we kind of reworked. There's a few songs we threw together pretty quickly. But it was like we hadn't really developed our songwriting process yet when we made that record, and that record was kind of like sort of exploring and discovering a little of that. So I feel like by the time we get to What If Someone's Watching Their TV, the next album, pretty much the same process, songwriting process we've had since that second record, all the way through to the newest one. And we always try to experiment, do different things. There's no set formula for what a screaming female song is or how it gets written. But that first album, I feel like is really stands aside from the rest of our output in the way the songs were written, because we just didn't know how to work together yet, you know?
Yeah.
And as far as the actual recording goes, you know, elements of that have come and gone, but for instance, we recorded to a click track on there because we couldn't record all three of us at the same time. There wasn't enough space and not enough microphones. We weren't going to be able to isolate. So it was like record a click track, record the drums, then record the bass and guitars on top of that, do everything separately. We didn't use a click track for the next three, maybe 4 albums after that. And then we have for the last few. So it's weird, you know, it's interesting. It's like, you know, you get out of that situation, maybe you don't need a click track anymore because, you know, you can play all together. And then you're like, oh, wait, if we incorporate a click track, at least on some songs, we can do it this way. We can add different things in, do different kind of edits. But ultimately, everything we've recorded since then, we do all recorded in the room together. Not that all of our particular moments in that take are going to be the ones that end up on the record, but it is the energy of us all literally being in a room playing together, working off of each other, feeding off of each other. So that's the only album we ever recorded where that doesn't exist. It's just I had to like memorize the songs, which I'm pretty good at doing anyway, but you know, you're sitting there and you're just like, oh man, did this part happen 8 times or am I on the 10th time? I can't remember.
Yeah. So it's almost like when you're going into a studio, this may sound obvious, but maybe not obvious to some people, but when you go into a studio environment, time is not on your side, and you kind of have to know what you're doing and who you are as a band before you do anything. When you're recording in your attic, you could do whatever you want. So you're really just kind of figuring it out if you really want to be a band or whatever. But
yeah, exactly. And I feel
yeah.
like it's cool that you appreciate that, because a lot of people
Yep.
think that the studio, you know, you go to someplace like Pachyderm, it's in like the middle of nowhere in Minnesota. It's beautiful outside. They're like, you guys are supposed to like vibe out while you're there. And you're like, no, man, this thing is costing a lot of money to be there every day. We got to get work done while we're there. We don't have a lot of time to vibe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, it's like you can't just play Madison Square Garden, because now it's like you're drawing, people are paying to see you, and you really have to have your shit together, you know.
Yeah,
Even if
exactly.
you know you're punk rock, but doesn't mean you can't, you still have to be professional, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to get up there and have your like a jam session with somebody you just met in front of thousands of people.
Yeah. So you spoke on your relationship with Steve Albini, and then you as a drummer, you probably would appreciate this. Like a lot of the records that he's worked on, even recently, you know, the drumming is just like whoa. And I'm not an engineer, but I'm just hearing, you know, there's a certain like crunch to it that's just like almost moving in a way. Would you agree?
Yeah, sure. Steve is definitely known for his drum sounds.
Yeah.
It's he can do more than that. Like that's not like it's not like he's a one trick pony, but a lot of people I feel like go to him with the hope of him helping them get that sound. You know what I mean? So I don't think it's like he's forcing people into a box, but I think it's like, you know, a rock band shows up and they're like, how do we get that Steve Albini drum sound? And a lot of it has to do with his studio. He has like a purposeful built studio, Electrical Audio, in
Yeah.
Chicago, and there's two main studios there. And the actually more expensive studio and fancier studio does not have as big of a live room, and they can do like small orchestral recordings in there. They have this extreme isolation room where it's one of those ones when you walk in, you can kind of like feel like you can hear like your blood pulsing through your ears because it's so quiet, like that kind of situation. So that studio gets used a lot for stuff that you might not associate with Steve Albini. But then the actual cheaper studio has this gigantic live room with like these really, really tall ceilings and these specially made bricks that he had trucked in from the Southwest to make up one of the walls because they have the clay has a certain quality to it or whatever. And that's the room that delivers the Steve Albini drum sound for sure. So, when we first started talking to the studio about recording there, they're like, I remember talking. This a good friend of mine, actually, Steven Soley, who I saw last night. They were the studio manager at the time there, and they were like, "So, are you guys thinking Studio A or Studio B?" And they're like, "Wait, never mind. You guys are definitely gonna be in Studio B."
Yeah, yeah. So when you're working with him, you worked with him on Ugly, and you did a live album with him. So when you're working with him and the finished product, was it the drumming that was like, okay, like wow, I'm glad we worked. This is definitely a Steve Albini result, or was there something else with working with him that you took away with like any kind of valuable experiences with working with him that you took away that helped you as a band outside of how he probably made you sound, if I'm making sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, Steve is still a good friend of the band, and I think that there's so much there that's outside of just like technical studio things that we learned or were able to take away. Um, he just has a really good perspective on being in bands and playing in kind of like working bands. And something that he is really about is that he likes to work and he's not afraid to work. So most producers and engineers, they'll get points on a record, and I'm saying that people don't deserve that, but it actually turns into a really complicated situation where you got to keep track of the expenses on a record in a different way so that you can pay out to the engineer or the producer over time and yada yada. Steve doesn't do any of that, although he probably could have just done a Nirvana record and a Bush record, and he got a few points on them and never had to work again in his life. But for him, it's more important to be able to have bands consistently coming in and doing things as simple as that. It's something that's really behind the scenes. It's kind of like an industry thing, but by not taking points, not having people sign contracts, not having to follow up for years about statements on like the sales of the record, it makes it so that smaller bands who operate in a different way can access that studio. And it might not even be about the upfront money, but it's just about the years of not having to have an accountant running, every statement through a studio. Um, so I think that ethic about like, if we want to make DIY and punk like really part of your life and not just like a moment, you gotta be willing to work. And if you're in this to be a rich, famous rock star or pop star or something, maybe that'll work for you. That's possible, but there's a lot more possibility out there to be a fulfilled working musician. If you operate on a smaller scale and are willing to put in that work and go play a lot of shows, go record a bunch of records at your studio, not just do 2 records a year, and try to only work with the most famous artists.
Yeah, it's like access is probably a problem for a lot of inspiring artists, not just bands. And the fact that Steve Albini is able to do that, he's worked with so many artists, Mets, Ty Segall, and not just like famous superstars like Nirvana and Dave Grohl and all that.
Yeah.
He's doing. I think that's really great, and I think you guys have been doing it too. You're taking smaller bands on tour. I've seen shows with you guys. I remember 2015, you brought Potty Mouth with you at Music Hall Williamsburg. That's really cool that you're paying that forward. So your new album, which I really loved, I thought it was really very very exciting. It was like I'm going to bed last night, and I knew I was talking to you, but like a lot of the songs were just in my head, were just stuck in my head. But before I talk about the new album, Don Giovanni, right? Your label. I know your first album, Baby Teeth, it was self-released, and then around Power Move, you linked up with Don Giovanni. So the differences between self-releasing, working with a label, what does that mean now for a band? Because a lot of artists now are just kind of just doing it themselves, or just putting stuff out and going viral or whatever it is. I'm not even sure what a lot of artists are doing now. So what does like a label situation look like today from your perspective?
And that's a really tough question because it's like
Yeah.
always changing, and right now it's changing very quickly. It's kind
Mm-hmm.
of like 6 months ago, I might have had a different answer than I do right now. Um, but one of the things, there's a few things that a label can really offer. One is distribution. So getting into stores and also just cleaning up all of the mess that's involved with streaming distribution, because that's not an easy thing to handle. When maybe you can get your stuff over here, but when are you getting the like statements back from them, and how do you break those things down? So distribution, when we were completely just releasing everything ourselves, I tried to get distribution for us, and I did. But if you're just one band, it's like a distribution company doesn't want to like open up an account for one band. You know what I mean? That's like a tough thing, because then they got to keep accounts for and deliver statements to everybody. So for them to be able to, for like somebody like Don Giovanni, where they now have a large catalog, so they have a lot of connections because they're talking to the distributor daily, and that becomes a really big deal because I don't know every single record store that is appropriate for Screaming Females record to be in the country, and especially not the world. These people have a better idea of that. So when they know that there's a new Screaming Females record coming out, they'll look up through their past accounts and be like, oh, this store in Arizona has ordered tons of Don Giovanni stuff, has ordered Screaming Female stuff. Like, let's make sure that we give them a call specifically, let them know this thing's coming. Doing that as an individual artist, really, really tough proposition. And then the other thing is just to be associated with something. It feels like, it's really easy to be atomized in this kind of digital sphere, like you're saying, kind of like going viral or blowing up by yourself. Um, it still means something to me to be associated with a scene or a crew, or just even if it's people I might not have like communicated with directly. It's people that I know are like friends of friends, or who have an interesting history, and we get to be kind of part of a little family.
Yeah, wow, that's a very interesting perspective. And I'm thinking about like now with the digital in the digital world, record stores is still a thing. You know, I went to a record store day thing last year. The line was out around the block. So it's kind of crazy how like vinyl has just outlasted all of these weird trends in the music business, even through the Napster stuff. So that's kind of crazy how I can go to a record store and just find a Screaming Females record, depending what, like you're saying, what store you're talking about. In New York, you're not gonna have any problems there finding that. You
Yeah.
know, they love y'all over here. So yeah. So the new album Desire Pathway, the first thing I'm hearing, track one on Brass Bell, are the synths. And I know you guys are no stranger to synths. Off the top of my head, Chamber of Secrets Part 2, and a lot of synths on there. Um, are you guys at a point now, 18 years in, let's start adding a lot of like, ingredients to our gumbo pot? Do you feel that way?
I feel like this goes back to something I said earlier, which is there was never like a formula set in place for what Screaming Females is going to sound like.
There you go.
So we're always ready to bring in anything that we are capable of, So I've spent a lot of time with synthesizers. I'm sitting in a room right now. I could pull them out. I have like a bunch of weird synthesizers, and it's not like I'm going to jump in and be like, okay, instead of playing drums, now Screaming Females has just these synthesizers and drum machines going. It just doesn't. It's not like it isn't what would serve our formula best, our band. But that doesn't mean that if I hear a moment where I think that that could add to it, I'm not going to jump in and be like, "Hey, let me try this thing out on the synthesizer," Um, and the same goes for percussion. Like I studied classical percussion for 9 years when I was young. So when we get in a studio, I feel like I can do more than just bang a tambourine around, as far as like the auxiliary percussion. And sometimes I'll hear a track where I'm like, I really hear like I can put a lot into this. I can make something happen out of this with all different kinds of little percussion instruments that I know how to play. But that doesn't mean I'm going to try to do it on every track as well. So so yeah, it just goes back to there being no formula, and uh, I've trained in a lot of these things, or I've spent a lot of time working on them. Marissa's the other side of it because she could sit down on any instrument and start to make it sound like music almost instantly. So if we're in a studio, you can just at the end, it's on uh at the end of Rose Mountain, the song Rose Mountain, I think it is. There's like this piano part happening, and it's literally because there was this weird piano in the studio, and she sat down and started playing something on it, and we're like, we got to get a mic on that, you know. And
Yeah.
Marissa knows a lot more about playing piano now. She's actually pretty good, but at that point, she didn't really know any that much of anything about playing piano. She just sat down and started like banging out a melody suddenly.
Yeah, yeah. So do you ever think of when you're adding new tricks to, any of your, your songs or your overall sound, do you ever think, well, people probably won't think this is like a Screaming Females song. Like I know you guys as a band don't think there's one, that you guys can't be pinned down, but do you ever think people that are listening to you do put you in a certain box?
I mean, people definitely do, but I feel like the people that are most interested in our band kind of like don't that's like that's a big generalization, but there's like with a lot of the reviews or some of the reviews or comments about the new album, I've seen some stuff, a lot of references to either like classic rock or like 90s alt rock. And I'm not saying that that stuff's not an influence on us. It certainly is, but I feel like that's missing some sort of history of the in the lineage of like punk rock and independent music, because uh the stuff that we're referencing in my head like can be tied as equally to Fugazi or even like something like Butthole Surfers as it can to you know uh Led Zeppelin or something.
Or the selector?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So uh so yeah, I don't know. As far as like whether we think about it when we're playing, I would be lying if I said it's never come up. But like the thing I can think of off the top of my head is our song "Wishing Well," which I feel like has become a fan favorite. When Mike brought in that bass line, he was playing it in practice, like in between some songs, like as we were practicing song, and then Marissa's toning her guitar or whatever, and he starts playing this bass line. And I was like, "Oh man, what is that?" And he's like, "Oh, it's this thing I've been playing around with, but I'm not sure if it's fits Scream Females the best because in my mind it's kind of almost like this Motown sort of bass line." Uh, and I was like, "Hey man, we've always said there's no formula. Let's give it a whirl. Let's see if we can turn it into something." Because it sounds really good. I really like the way it's sounding. So, uh, like I said, it's not like we've never thought these things, but they've never really built a barrier to us trying something out. We'll try something out. I feel like the only time it really comes into play is stuff like sequencing an album. If we're listening through, we got 15 songs, we want to trim it to 10, kind of pick out some of the songs, we take a look, and we're like, let's make sure there's some guitar solos on here. We don't want to deliver a record where we cut all the songs that got good guitar solos because if you're going to come for a Screaming Females record, you probably want a guitar solo or two.
Yeah, or two. So with Ornament, you almost got rid of this song. So exactly how long was this song in the works, or how much time do you usually take on a song before it's like, okay, we're either overthinking this or we're just not going to do this?
It's hard to say. I feel like there's probably less than 10 songs that we've gotten past the point of having an A section and a B section, uh, and we dump them. It's like happened so few times. We get to a point and we're just like, we got to finish this out. Like we got an A and B. Let's find that bridge. Let's make this happen. That song, it's just like, it still to this day has a lot of different feels butted right up against each other as far as like the rhythms go. Um, I'd say it's a pretty cohesive feel as a full piece. But for me as a drummer, it was like, man, it feels like I'm just like turning on a dime here, trying to like figure out, okay, now it's really straight ahead. Now it's got a little bit of a swing. Now it's got like this build thing. Um, and just trying to find all those feels. So I think we were trying to, for a while, sort of make it feel more natural to us as players, but everything we would try, it would feel less natural. So that just went on a long time. And I'd say that because of the pandemic, it extended it even a lot further. So it's kind of unprecedented in everyone's lives, but then it's unprecedented in our songwriting process. But there hasn't really been things that we like abandoned and then came back to like years later. That's not really something we've done in our history. So I'd say that it's kind of a unique moment where we had something that we pretty nearly abandoned and came back to it like years later. And it's probably really an effect of the pandemic and just getting back together and being like, what were we doing last time we actually played together?
Well, the song is in my head now that we're talking about it, which is a good thing because I look for songs like that. Like that's how I got into music, just like melodies and just it's got to
Yeah,
gravitate towards me in that way. So when I'm thinking about Screaming Females, and the amount of time you guys have been here, there's probably a lot of significant moments for you as a band, at least as a fan watching it happen. Like you're working with Garbage, you're touring Minor Threats practice space in DC. So do you look at all these things as like, whoa, we did that. That was cool. Or playing with the breeders and all this kind of stuff. Does that have any weight to you at all?
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I mean, there's moments that have just as much weight that are like friends that I could tell you, like we hung out this one night on like, sat on a porch somewhere in Indiana and that like, and I would never have met that person if it hadn't been for being on tour. So they have like just as much, uh, those moments have just as much weight in my mind. But like, this is why we're out here doing this. It's like we want to like build these memories and have these experiences that we would never have had the opportunity to have otherwise. And then especially when you get people that you looked up to growing up, or people that have like paved the way before you, when they come through and they show you one way or another that they appreciate what you're doing, that's huge. It feels amazing. Being up on stage, we actually played like a cover with the Breeders and I got to play drums on it, and just being up there and having the Deal Sisters turn back and look at me to count off the song is just like, it's a surreal moment. It's not something I
Yeah.
ever thought would happen.
I
Um,
saw I saw you guys at Terminal 5 with the breeders. That was nuts.
yeah.
And I heard Marissa, she was like, this band is important to us. Hopefully they're important to you too. And that was true. The breeders are important to me. Screaming Females are important to me. So it was really cool. That was a really good moment to see that. Like I love that. And I will say another significant moment for me, being a fan of Screaming Females for so long is you guys played a show at Times Square in a movie theater. I was like, this is incredible. You guys can sound good anywhere, either in a theater space or in a freaking movie theater. That was nuts.
Yeah, that was fun. I mean, that was in the era where there was so much DIY stuff happening in New York that
Yeah.
there was all these different crews and everybody was just always trying to find the newest spot that they could try to put a show on in. And most of the time that's some like weird warehouse in Brooklyn or something. But then
Yeah.
people getting the idea like, what would be the weirdest place you could possibly see a DIY or punk show in New York? Times Square.
Yeah. Yeah, that's insane. That's kind of crazy. I think about that show like all the time. But your garden party that you guys have been doing the last couple of years, like what's the importance of that? Like why did you guys what was the meaning behind putting that together?
So that has like a long evolution. We've only called it the garden party for the past 3 times that we've done it, but
Mm.
we had been doing shows in Jersey every February, especially in Jersey City, for 4 years before that even. And then even before that, Don Giovanni Records used to run a yearly showcase kind of like celebration party,
Yeah.
often in February. Um, so it's just something that's sort of like evolved over time, and I think giving it a name sort of gives it like a little bit more weight, and allows us to like have it grow in a way that I think would have been harder without like calling it something. But I don't know. It's a fun thing to do in like a downtime for music touring and stuff. It's hard to tour in the winter. There's not as many shows happening, and then it's kind of a I ran punk shows in New Brunswick for years, and I would run 3 or 4 shows a month, and it was really about trying to get cool mix of bands on a bill, bring people out who might not otherwise see this touring band, or maybe you get two bands that sound really different from each other. So you get two slightly different crowds coming in together and see if they can appreciate each other. And being able to do the garden party and book that is really just that same kind of feeling that I don't get as much these days, but on like a bigger scale, and try to bring together um, truly like independent artists and celebrate that. And I feel like there's so many festivals that happen now that you see the flyer, the poster come up, and it seems like it's literally booked by like a Spotify algorithm. And we really want to like not have anything to do with that and sort of break that mold. So yeah, it's just the three of us booking a couple shows in New Jersey in the middle of the winter.
Don't stop that. I think it's really cool that you guys do that, especially like all the time. Yeah, it's like you're giving back to this state that made you guys, which is really cool. I think it's beautiful. 18 years as a band. What are some of the things that you look back on like, whoa, we did that? And what are some things now looking forward that you want to achieve?
Well, one of the things that's always amazing to me is the places we've been able to travel as a band, and really, we've never had management. It's not like hooking up through these. It's always been people who kind of have a similar frame of mind and idea about what it is, what music can do, and what it can do for a community. Um, that can be built or sustained through music. So we've been places, literally on the trust of somebody emailing us and saying, "Do you want to come play a show in Costa Rica?" And we're like, "Yes, we do." And they're like, "We've never done a show for an international band, but I think we can. Do you want to make it happen?" And we're like, "Yeah, let's make it happen." And Ho Chin, who ran that show, is still somebody that we still talk to, and we still see him. Last time we were in Europe, he was living in Spain, and we saw him out there. And coming up, we're going to Alaska this week and playing a week of shows in Alaska, and it's our 50th state. And I really hold near and dear to my heart the time that we got to go to Hawaii. And that was just the same thing. It was some kids running punk shows who were like, "We can bring you out if you want to go to Hawaii." And we're like, "Absolutely, let's do it." And we stayed in Chinatown and Honolulu, and these kids' lofts, and they just drove us around and showed us all their favorite spots in Hawaii. I remember on the flight over, I had personally never been to Hawaii. It was my first time and also the band's first time. The in-flight magazine was saying, like Hawaii is a lot different than you might expect it to be. Like the whole, you know, when you land, getting like a flower lei, like made from real flowers, you're probably not going to see that. If you do see the leis, they're probably like plastic leis. It's not something that's a tradition that you see as much anymore, or whatever. So I like kind of tempered my idea. We ended up landing. It's a kid who's grown up in Hawaii. He's wearing his grandfather's like real Hawaiian shirt, which you can tell because they print the patterns inside out so that they're a little muted. So it's like really bright on the inside, but on the outside they're a
Wow.
little muted. And he gives us these flower leis. And I was like, the in-flight magazine said that this wasn't going to happen, and he's like, "I don't know." He's like, "My grandparents told me how to make them. You just grab the flowers from the tree in your backyard, and I made them myself." We always do it when people we care about show up or whatever. So, for every musician that complains about how in touring, you get to go to someplace like Paris and you're there for 14 hours and seven of them are loading in and sound checking, and you never get to see anything. The flip side of that is that you get to be temporarily embedded in like real like culture and local um you get all the local secrets out of the people that are running the shows and the other bands that are playing in a way that you don't get as a tourist. And I'm really excited to be able to go do this for Alaska now. And the person bringing to us to Alaska, Jaybird, we've been trying to go for Alaska for a long time. We've been trying to always put feelers out there, and when she came through, we had a conversation with her on Zoom, and she was like, most bands that come play Alaska from the lower 48, they play Anchorage and then they play Fairbanks, the big city and the college town. She's like, "I think it would be really cool if we went and played some other spots." She's like, "I've been in bands in Alaska a long time. There's these other cities that have always had scenes, but bands never tour through. And I think it would be really fun." And she's like, "And I want to make sure that when you do play Anchorage, you don't just play a bar and we try to do an all ages show, maybe support. She's like, there's this new queer Latinx cafe that they've been doing drag shows. It'd be kind of fun to do like maybe a punk show, all ages punk show there during the day, something like that. And we were just like, yes, we are so down. This is exactly what we want out of this trip. It's not just to mark it off the list and say, oh, we finally played every state. It's to actually go and see what Alaska's like and what the people there are doing, you know?
See, I knew you were gonna say something that was very communal like that. You know, it wasn't like, oh, I want to play with the Rolling Stones or go on tour with like Foo Fighters or whatever. No, it's like, oh no, we're gonna go into this. You know, we're gonna go to play this punk show in Alaska and out the outskirts of, you know what I mean, like something really raw. That's awesome. That's so cool. And you guys are in New York, April 28th at Elsewhere, which is so cool. So Jarrett, thank you so much for coming on the show. New album is Desire Pathway. So anything else you want to plug? This is your time.
We got a bunch of shows coming up all over the US, a couple Canada shows, going to Europe. So yeah, just check out screamfemales.com. We got all the infos there. You can find the album for sale or streaming or all the tour dates.
Awesome. Appreciate you, Jarrett. Thank you for coming out.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.